my intention, along with the senior senator from California, Senator Feinstein, and the senior senator from Nebraska, Senator Hagel, to offer legislation to close the U.S. military prison at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Now, again, we have decided not to offer the measure on the bill before us, the National Defense Authorization Act. We certainly will be offering it as an amendment to the Defense Appropriations Bill when that bill comes to the floor. One way or another, we intend to get this legislation passed this year. I think, Mr. President, there is a remarkable agreement on the need to find a way to close this prison. All of our closest allies have urged that Guantanamo be closed, as have many leaders from across the political spectrum here in the United States. Last June, after 3 detainees committed suicide on a single day, President Bush acknowledged that the prison has damaged America's reputation abroad. He said, I quote, "No question, Guantanamo sends a signal to some of our friends, provides an excuse, for example, to say the United States is not upholding the values that they're trying to encourage other countries to adhere to." The President said, "I'd like to close Guantanamo." More recently, Secretary of Defense Bob Gates and Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice have urged that the prison be shut down. On March the 23rd, the Washington Post, citing senior administration officials, reported that Secretary Gates had repeatedly argued that the detention facility at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, had become so tainted abroad that legal proceedings at Guantanamo would be viewed as illegitimate. According to the Post, Secretary Gates told President Bush and others that it should be shut down as quickly as possible. Well, let's make no mistake about it. The current detainees at Guantanamo do include a number of extremely dangerous terrorists with the determination and ability, if given the opportunity, to inflict harm upon the United States and its citizens. Among the detainees are 14 senior leaders of al-Qaeda, including Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who has confessed to being a mastermind of the September 11th attacks, as well as others. And we must and we can hold these enemy combatants in maximum security conditions elsewhere. But the critics of Guantanamo are right. The 5-year-old prison at Guantanamo is a stain on the honor of our country. By holding people at Guantanamo without charge, without judicial review, without appropriate legal counsel, and in the past, subjecting many of them to what really amounts to torture, regardless of how you want to dress it up. By doing all those things, we have forfeited the moral high ground and stand as hypocrites in the eyes of the world. As Secretary Gates has argued, any legal proceedings or convictions now taking place on Guantanamo will be viewed as illegitimate in the eyes of the world. Perhaps most seriously, from a pragmatic standpoint, maintaining the prison at Guantanamo is simply counterproductive. It's become a propaganda bonanza and recruitment tool for Islamic fundamentalists. It alienates our friends and allies. It detracts from our ability to regain the moral high ground and rally the world against the terrorists who threaten us. The administration has repeatedly described detainees at Guantanamo as the worst of the worst, or as former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld once described them, the most dangerous, best trained, vicious killers on the face of the earth. Unquestionably, some of the detainees fit these descriptions. However, an exhaustive study of Guantanamo detainees conducted by the nonpartisan, highly regarded National Journal last year came to the following conclusions. A large percentage, perhaps the majority, of the detainees were not captured on any battlefield, let alone on the battlefield in Afghanistan, as President Bush once asserted. Secondly, fewer than 20% of the detainees have ever been al-Qaeda members. Third, many scores and perhaps hundreds of the detainees were not even Taliban foot soldiers, let alone al-Qaeda members. Fourth, the majority of people at Guantanamo were not captured by U.S. forces, but rather handed over by reward-seeking Pakistanis and Afghan warlords and by villagers of highly dubious reliability. For example, one of the detainees in Guantanamo is a man who was conscripted by the Taliban to work as an assistant cook. The U.S. government's evidence against this detainee consists in its entirety of the following. Keep in mind, the evidence against this detainee consists in its entirety of the following. A, detainee is associated with the Taliban. 1, the detainee indicates he was conscripted into the Taliban. B, detainee engaged in hostilities against the U.S. or its coalition partners. 1, the detainee admits he was a cook's assistant for Taliban forces in Nareem, Afghanistan, under the command of Haji Mullah Baki. 2, get this, detainee fled from Nareem to Kabul during the Northern Alliance attack and surrendered to the Northern Alliance. That's it. That's the evidence they have against this detainee. He was forced by the Taliban to be a cook. When he saw his opportunity to get out of there, he escaped, went to the Northern forces, and surrendered to them. And now he sits in Guantanamo. What kind of justice is this? Well, Mr. President, the situation at Guantanamo is rather personal with me. Not only was I stationed there for some time back when I was a Navy pilot, and I have since been back, of course, to visit, but more personal, it was in July of 1970 when I was at that time, a rather young staff person for the Select Committee on U.S. Involvement in Southeast Asia of the House of Representatives. I was working with a congressional delegation on a fact-finding mission to Vietnam in the summer of 1970, and through a series of circumstances, and because of the bravery of a young Vietnamese man who had been in the tiger cages on Con Son Island and who was let out. Now, why was he let out? He was let out because usually when you got to the tiger cages, you were never seen again. Well, the South Vietnamese had these prisons put up on Con Son Island. Actually, they were built by the French, Mr. President, when the French ruled Indochina. So the French built these prisons on an island off the coast. The Vietnamese took them over and then built these so-called tiger cages, which were hidden within the prison so no one could find them. Nguyen Cao Ly was sentenced to the tiger cages because he had led a student protest at Saigon University. He was the student leader at Saigon University in 1969, early 70, and because he had led a protest against the war, the police picked him up, the South Vietnamese Army picked him up and sent him out to Con Son. No one knew where he was, but the students refused to go back to class until their student leader was released. And it was time to take the exams, and this was a big deal for families. They were putting pressure on the university, and finally the government let Nguyen Cao Ly go. And they told him at the time, though, that if he ever said anything, they would kill his brother because his brother was